Music lesson number 2 with Jen and Vi. We will be discussing time signatures, note values, and measures. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a measure. What is a measure? First of all, how do we know where the measure starts and ends? We have lines that go down the staff. There's one there, and there's another one there, and there's another one there. So each of those lines tells you where the measure begins and ends. A measure is also known as a bar. And so here we have 4 measures, or 4 bars of music. The lines that distinguish the measures are also called bar lines, because each measure is also called a bar. So, how do we know how many counts there are in each measure? Well, we've got 2 numbers at the beginning right after our treble clef. Those 2 numbers together are called a time signature, so we know the timing in each measure. Here we have 4/4. Well, what does 4/4 time mean? It means the top number, 4, tells us how many counts there are in that measure. So there are 4 counts in all of these measures. The bottom number 4 tells us what kind of note gets the count. So how do we know which note to count 4 times? So in this time signature, the 4 on the bottom means the quarter note. The quarter note is the big black note there, filled in. A filled in black note is a quarter note with a stem. The stem is that little line that comes off of the note. So in that measure 3, we have how many quarter notes?
4.
1, 2, 3, 4. So if you will point back at the time signature there, Vi, 4 quarter notes in each measure. So the top number tells us how many, not how many notes, but how many counts, 4, and the bottom note number tells us what kind of note. So 4 quarter notes. Now let's look at the first note. The very first note is called a whole note. A whole note has 4 quarter notes in it. So draw us a 1/4, like a fraction. So think of a quarter note as just that, 1/4 of a whole note. So there are 4 quarter notes in one whole note. Now how about the second kind of note? Half notes. In the second measure, we have 2 half notes. Well, how many halves are there in a whole? 2. So in that whole note, we have 2 half notes as well. 4 quarter notes to make up one whole note. And how many quarter notes to make up a half note? 2 quarter notes that would make up a half note. So think of it as a little pie. So there's our whole note, and if we divide it into 4 pieces, we have 4 quarter notes. But if you get rid of that line in the middle, yes, but get rid of the line through the left or the right half, that's fine. Yeah.
This one?
Sure. Now, that is a half, so we have a half note. If you got rid of the other line on the other side, that would also be a half note then. And the whole thing is a whole note. So let's look at our notes again in the measures. There's our whole note to start us off with. Each whole note has 2 half notes, 2 halves for a whole. And each whole note also has 4 quarter notes, 4 quarters for a whole. Each half note has 2 quarter notes, 2 quarters to make a half. Alright, so let's go back to the time signature. The top note again is how many counts per measure. The bottom tells us what kind of note gets the count. Let's change that time signature and see if you guys can figure out how to make the counts for each measure this time. Let's make it a 3/4. So we're gonna change the time signature. You'll see some of these in your music. Here's a 3/4 time signature. So if the top note tells us how many counts per measure, how many counts do we have now? 3. So let's change the notes in the measure so that we have the right amount of counts. We still are counting the quarter note, so we have to make sure we have 3 quarter notes. So let's see, 2 half notes plus 1 quarter note equals how many beats? How many counts?
3.
1, 2 for the quarter note, and 3. And then 1, 2, 3 quarter notes in the third measure. And in the fourth measure, we also have 1, 2 for the half note, and then 3, an extra quarter note. Now how about that whole note? We have something wrong there. How many counts is that? 4, right? 4 quarter notes. But we're only supposed to have 3. So let's get rid of that whole note. We'll just get rid of it for now. Let's change the time signature again. How about 2-4? If we have a 2-4 time signature, how many counts are there per measure? 2. And the quarter note still gets the beat. This still has the count because there's 4 on the bottom. So let's look at the second measure there. We have 1 half note. How many counts is that? 1, 2. How many quarter notes do we need? 2, right? Because there's only 2 counts in the measure. And how about that last measure? Well, we could get rid of that quarter note. That would give us a half note that has only 2 counts. So that is a time signature. 2-4, 3-4, 4-4. There are also other kinds of time signatures, which we will discuss in the next lesson. So to review, we have measures. Measures are a way for us to divide up the time in music on the staff. Each measure is also called a bar, so a measure or a bar. The measures are separated by lines, called bar lines. Time signatures tell us how to count the music. So you can have different time signatures. 4-4, 3-4 is above, 2-4. There are also other time signatures that we will talk about later. There are 2 numbers in the time signature. The top number tells us how many counts or how many beats there are in a measure. The bottom number tells us what kind of note gets that beat. What kind of note are we counting? So the 4 on the bottom, think of it like a fraction, 1/4 or 1/4. So the quarter note gets the beat. So how many quarter notes do we have to have in each measure? Well, in 4/4 time, we have to have 4 quarter notes in the measure. In 3/4 time, we would have to have 3 quarter notes in each measure. Now the quarter note is the black note with the stem on it. A whole note would have 4 quarter notes in it. You can change the time up there to 4/4 by just so we're even. So the whole note has 4 counts in this time signature. Think of the whole as that pie. You can have 2 halves to that whole. So 2 half notes equal 1 whole note. And 4 quarter notes equal 1 whole note. 4 quarters to a whole. How many quarter notes are in a half note then? 2. You have 2 quarter notes equal 1 half note. 2 half notes equal 1 whole note. And that's a review of music lesson number 2. Stay tuned for the next one.